itself came to embrace and promulgate Leninist language and policy, and that relied heavily on the use of armed force to stifle dissent. While much of the violence was carried out by security personnel, the delegation of the state's means and instruments of violence to newly formed militias and to armed citizens was a defining feature of the Red Terror. So, to summarize, it was an extremely violent and traumatizing decade, and it was the first decade of Sinedu's life. In 1982, her father, who was an administrator of several government schools, was imprisoned without trial for 2 years on suspicion of subversive sentiments. The family did not know whether he would ever be released, and Sinedu's mother had a job as a nurse in a government hospital to keep food on the table. Over the next year, more than 500,000 Ethiopians died of famine. So not only was there government turmoil and violence and death and torture and wrongful imprisonment, but there was also a natural disaster of famine. Despite this, Sinedu focused fervently on her studies. Sorry, I'm going to move my notes. She was determined to be the best of the best and to one day make it to the U.S. She wanted to be a doctor and she wanted to study at Harvard. She was so dedicated to her studies that it really got in the way of her social life, which was non-existent. Her hard work did eventually pay off, and she was accepted to Harvard University as well as 23 other colleges. Her transition to Boston, as you can imagine, was a very difficult one for her. Ethiopia is very different from the Western world. And not only is the climate different, Boston is very cold and dark in the winter, but the Western culture was strange to her, even though a lot of her fellow students in high school were Westerners. She just felt very out of place and had a lot of trouble making friends. She also found the workload to be very difficult. She was very used to succeeding in academics and getting A's, but she was getting pretty consistent B's as a freshman, and she was worried that this would keep her from getting into a good medical school. An acquaintance of Sinedu's at Harvard, who was also from Ethiopia, they went to high school together, said this: she gave the impression of being able to handle everything perfectly. She was calm, calculated, composed, and controlled at all times. she was in counseling her entire time at Harvard as well. The summer of her freshman year, she wrote a letter to a complete stranger at the Harvard Law School. She said that she picked the name at random out of a phone book. What she wrote really cannot be mistaken for anything other than a cry for help. I'm going to read you a little bit of it. Why am I writing this letter? Because I am desperate. As far as I can remember, my life has been hellish. Year after year, I became lonelier and lonelier. When I'm with a group of people, I keep so quiet. I have nothing to say. That I send the chills through those who notice me. When I cry, people forget about me or dislike being with me. When I'm with one person, I shake with nervousness, fearing that we'll run out of things to say, or they will be bored. For math, I had a teacher. For painting, I had a teacher. For social life, I had no one. I'm like a person who can't swim, joking for life in a river. All you have to do is give me a hand and put into words what you already know. No expenses, commitments, or risks involved. You can say no at any minute. All it takes is a few hours from your week and some energy. Please do not close the door in my face, even if you are not interested. Or please give this letter to a friend or relative who might be. The recipient of the letter passed it on to the dean of the school, and it was filed away in her file. And as far as I know, nothing else was done with it. But finally, there was some hope in Sinedu's life. On March 8th, 1993, she wrote a hopeful entry in her diary. The last 4 days were the highlight of my life thus far in Harvard. My rooming problem was solved in the best possible way, saving my face and also with a girl I thought would be really enjoyable to be with. With a girl I would make the queen of my life. I could just see myself raising my head proudly whenever people ask me who I'm rooming with. I could see myself working hard to improve my life so as not to spoil the beautiful chance I am given. But she adds, you know what I fear? I fear that shitty, cringing feeling that accompanies me. Should my rooming thing not work out in a way that makes me hold my head high and speak of it proudly? When she went home from college for the first time, she told her father she had found a best friend. Sinedu had met her new roommate, Trang, in so crowded that they had to stand up for 7 days. They eventually made it to Indonesia and stayed at a refugee camp there for about a year before making it to, I think it was Sacramento. Oh, sorry, no, it was San Diego. They reached San Diego in 1985. But Trang's mother had stayed in Vietnam with her youngest daughter to just take care of her and continue to work, with the plan to meet them in the United States when they made it there. Trang's father brought her and her other sister. He tried to teach them English along the way, and they decided to move to Dorchester, Massachusetts, which is basically in Boston. I used to live there. Because of all the prestigious schools in the area. Trang studied seriously. She took it very seriously. And she missed her mother and sister. And she hoped they would be reunited, but it wasn't until her senior year in high school that they were able to bring them over to the United States. But when her mother and sister came to the United States, her father and mother started to fight and argue pretty seriously, so much so that her mother had to file a restraining order on her father, and then her father moved to San Diego, leaving the rest of the family in Boston. Trang had to kind of become the caretaker of the house, the head of the household, because she kind of knew the most English and was able to help her mother translate important documents, and was able to teach her sister's English. She was described by her teachers and classmates as like being very kind, very warm, but also very quiet and studious. She helped others with their studies as well. She tutored them, and she hoped that she could attend Harvard and eventually become a pediatrician. In her application essay to Harvard, she wrote, "I will never forget the fact that I was a refugee, nor will I ever forget that I am one of the leaders of the future who will make significant differences." When she was a freshman, Boston Magazine chose her as one of 25 who can save Boston. She was presented as the final entry, the hope of the next generation. She had also a difficult time adjusting to Harvard, as I think most new college students do. But when you go to Harvard, presumably you're like the top of your class at your high school, and then you go to Harvard with a bunch of other people who were the top of their class, and soon all of you all kind of, no one really shines, and if you do, then you're an extraordinary mind. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. So the relationship between Sinedu and Trang started out great, even though Sinedu was pretty reserved and cold. They got along pretty well. But shortly after the beginning of the school year, things kind of took a turn, and Sinedu wrote in her diary about 1 month into the school year, "On the way to depression and battered with pessimistic She'll live on, tucked in the warmth and support of her family, while I cry alone in the cold. The bad way out, I see, is suicide, and the good way out is killing, savoring their fear, and then suicide. But you know what annoys me the most? I do nothing. In the spring of their junior year, Sinedu had become more and more angry with Trang for not being the best friend that she thought a best friend would be. This friendship was not what she expected it to be. So she would purposely leave the room a total mess. She would leave food out to rot, and she would just act very cold and angry toward Trang. Trang's family said that she wanted to move out, but she was afraid that she would anger Sinedu even more. But she did make a secret request to move out mid-year, but it was denied. At the end of March, Trang told Sinedu that she would be rooming with 2 other girls the following year. Sinedu was absolutely crushed by this and begged her to change her mind. They had kind of a bunch of big fights about it, and Sinedu wrote her a letter reminding her that she had no one and that Trang was her only friend, even though she actually did have a brother in the United States and several cousins in Boston, and her former high school classmate who also went to Harvard. Trang wrote back, "I respect you, so you should respect my decision. Furthermore, your actions about what happened really hurt me. If I had neither care nor think of you as a friend, it would not have hurt me. Despite what happened, I hope we can still be friends." Sinedu, after this, completely stopped speaking to her. On Sunday, May 21st, 1995, Sinedu called her former high school classmate and, kind of out of the blue, invited him to have lunch with her. He noticed that she had completely changed her appearance. She was wearing high-heeled shoes. She was kind of dressed up. She was showing off her legs, wearing shorts. All things that weren't common for her and weren't common for women in Ethiopia. She was also wearing quite a bit of makeup, and she actually seemed happy for the first time in a long time. What he didn't know was that in the weeks prior, she had packed up a lot of her more expensive belongings and sent them to her cousins. And she had purchased 2 knives and some nylon rope. The following week, after she had turned in the final projects for some of her classes, she was no longer able to study, and she came up with medical excuses to get out of the rest of her exams. Other students in the library noticed that she had kind of a glazed look in her eyes and was having trouble focusing. She sent a photograph that week as well of herself to the Harvard Crimson, which was a daily student newspaper, and with it she sent an anonymous note that said, "Keep this picture. There will soon be a very juicy story involving the person in this picture." On Saturday, May 27th, which is my birthday, Trang went to study for her exam she wasn't going to be able to stop Sinedu from stabbing Trang, she ran out of the room to try to get help, and finally found a student in the courtyard who was awake because everyone was sleeping. When the police arrived, they found the door to the suite barricaded. Sinedu had pushed a heavy desk against it from the inside. When they got in, they found Trang's body on the floor in Sinedu's room. She had 45 stab wounds, like I said, and Sinedu was hanging in the bathroom from a length of rope. Police believed that the noose had been set up ahead of time. It was cut to the right length, and the coil had been neatly replaced in a cabinet. Paramedics came and attempted to resuscitate Sinedu, but she was pronounced dead. This was a huge tragedy and absolutely heartbreaking to the families of these two girls, these two women. It kind of rocked Harvard and Boston, but Harvard kind of spoke very little of the event and tried to keep it on the down low. not